What are we discussing on today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast? Are the D-backs looking to trade an outfielder this offseason? And where do the Snakes land on Fangraphs' latest power rankings entering this free agency?
You are Locked on Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You're listening to who? The always charismatic host of this podcast, Millard Thomas, multimedia journalist and graphic designer. So please go check out my website, millardthomas24.myportfolio.com. On there, you can see all my latest work, from my packages to my articles, my photos, and my graphic design. Today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. On today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, what are we going to discuss? Well, I want to talk to you guys about the D-backs potentially trading one of their outfielders this offseason, where the D-backs land on the Fangraphs' latest power rankings entering free agency. And then, of course, entering the podcast with a little player review discussing Joe Mantiply's 2024 season. Thank you for making Locked on Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free. It's available on all platforms, so please continue to tell your friends. And one of those platforms is YouTube. Please hit subscribe to Locked on Diamondbacks on YouTube. All right. Let's get back into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, and let's discuss some rumors that the D-backs could be trading one of their outfielders this offseason, because apparently Mike Hazen has been getting some phone calls. He's not necessarily picking up the phone and dialing the buttons, but apparently he's been receiving phone calls, and he's just listening to the conversations, listening to the offers, and apparently teams are interested in mostly Jake McCarthy and Alek Thomas, because we know Corbin Carroll, he's not going anywhere. He is a building block. He is a franchise piece. He is untouchable. Lourdes Gurriel, I don't think he's untouchable, but he feels like a guy that's probably locked in with the D-backs next year. Just a veteran, pretty solid contract. I don't think he's going to be moved anywhere. I think teams would be more in on Jake McCarthy and Alek Thomas, and that's what it seems. It seems like teams have been calling the D-backs about those two players, but D-backs also do have like Pavin Smith, who has been playing a little outfield, Jorge Barosa. And so the question is, should the D-backs look to move on their outfielders, more specifically a Jake McCarthy or an Alek Thomas? Would that be a smart decision by Arizona at this point, in their franchise this offseason, where you look at their rotation already pretty much set? Yes, they could still add a rotation member at the back end to be better potentially than Erod or Monty. They could definitely use another high leverage reliever, right? But it's not like there's a ton of huge needs right now on this roster. So it's like, if you were to trade Jake McCarthy or Alek Thomas, it's not like you have to do that. You feel like with the team that you currently have constructed, like there's definitely holes at first base and DH, but you probably don't feel like you have to move Jake McCarthy or Alek Thomas. It's more of a, if there's a good offer that helps your team, yeah, let's make that deal. But the D-backs don't actively have to seek out or pursue trades to move off of Jake McCarthy or Alek Thomas to fill other holes in their roster, because they could either do that internally or just through free agency. So it's not like they have to move one of their outfielders. The question is, should they move one of their outfielders? And I don't know if they should, but if the D-backs want to, I don't think it would be a bad move, because looking at the recent history of D-backs trades when it comes to moving certain outfielders has worked out a lot in Arizona's favor. And so if the Mike Hazen and the D-backs front office were given an offer that seemed pretty enticing, that you feel like can help out this team right now, in the future, yada, yada, like the D-backs should definitely consider that move, because I look at some of the outfield moves the last few years that the D-backs have pulled off, right? You look at Dalton Varsho. Like, Varsho was a guy, if you ask me, Varsho, Carroll, Jake McCarthy, or Alek Thomas, like Varsho is probably number 2 on my list. And, even though he was number 2 to Corbin Carroll, Varsho was the guy who I saw the most production from. He was the best defensive outfielder with 30 home run potential and like 20 to 30 steal potential is like, I hadn't really seen Corbin Carroll do something like that. So it's like, it was hard to move Dalton Varsho at the time when we did. And thankfully, I was wrong because Varsho's still an elite defensive player, but the offense hasn't really been able to be sustainable since being moved to Toronto. Meanwhile, D-backs get back two legit starters in Lourdes Gurriel, who has been a Gold Glove nominee, a power bat, just a steady middle of the order outfielder for you in your lineup. And you get back Gabriel Moreno, who is going to be like the D-backs catcher for the next decade plus. Like, that's a fantastic deal by the D-backs. You look at trading Dominic Canzone in the Paul Sewald trade. Like, I think Sewald has gotten so much flack the last couple of years, and I know about all the blown saves in the second half of 2024, but the D-backs do not get to the World Series without Paul Sewald. Yes, he blew game one of the World Series. He did not allow an earned run prior to the World Series that whole postseason. He was nails up until that game one against Texas Rangers. And so let's not forget that D-backs should not get to the World Series and make that playoff run without Paul Sewald. So trading Dominic Canzone for Sewald, I think, was a win for Arizona. Then Dominic Fletcher to the White Sox for pitching prospect Christian Maynard. We'll still seeing if this one is going to pan out. But in terms of the value, I did like this at the time, and I still feel good about this trade. Fletcher hasn't really done much for the White Sox, and I still believe Maynard could be, maybe a back-end starter, maybe a high-leverage reliever. We'll see, but I still think Maynard could be a pretty good pitcher on the major league level. So when I look at the D-backs outfield trades the last few years, I think they've all generally gone in the D-backs' favor. And so if there is a good McCarthy or Thomas deal out there where it's like, okay, we could put Thomas in a deal, package him with like another prospect and get back like a Devin Williams or like a Ryan Hesley, like some of those back end high leverage relievers I talked about that you would need to trade for, like I would definitely do that. Like if I had to choose between those two guys, I'm definitely leaning Thomas over McCarthy because the thing with those two players, the thing we always hype up Thomas for is his incredible defense, right? We say he's one of the best defensive center fielders, if not the best defensive center fielder in baseball, but the offense hasn't been there. He's often been injured. And so, yes, the defense is great, but the offense, it's like pretty non-existent. Meanwhile, look at Jake McCarthy. When he first came in, the defense was a work in progress. But now you look at this past season, Gold Glove nominee, probably the best or arguably the best D-backs defensive outfielder. Meanwhile, there was also like a 6-week stretch where he carried this D-backs offense when we had like Walker and Marte out. Really good season overall, finished with a strong slash line. So it's like if I had to keep one of these guys, give me the guy who seems to constantly be ascending and getting better overall with his game, and a guy who I've already seen be productive and be a good major leaguer for multiple seasons in Jake McCarthy. Yes, McCarthy could probably land and net a better deal, but I would rather have McCarthy, keep him on the roster, a guy that's young, controllable, can be productive for the next few years on a cheap contract. I'd rather keep him than an Alek Thomas, who is just this more theoretical player who, yes, he's a great defensive player and we want him to be good and he can be good in theory, but every time he goes out there and he doesn't produce, you're just taking playing time away from guys who are good, like the McCarthys and the Randall Grichuk's this past season. And so I would rather move off the Alek Thomas experiment. I still love him overall as a player, and I still like his potential. He can still be a good major leaguer, but I don't know if he's going to work out in the Arizona system. I would rather move Thomas, see what you can get for him, and build around the Gurriel, Corbin Carroll, Jake McCarthy trio in the outfield and fill your other needs through free agency or whatever. D-backs don't need to trade one of their outfielders, but if there is a good deal for Alek Thomas out there, I think the D-backs should pull the trigger. Now I want to discuss where the D-backs land on the latest power rankings brought to you by Fangraphs in segment number 2. But hey, if you want to place a wager down on an upcoming Arizona Cardinals or Phoenix Suns game, then the best place to do that, of course, is going to be FanDuel, because get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place the live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. My favorite thing to do on FanDuel is the same game parlay. Whenever the Cardinals are playing, sometimes, not always, but sometimes when the Cardinals are playing, I'd be like, hey, give me that Kyler Murray anytime touchdown. Hey, Marvin Harrison anytime TD. You know what? Give me that Cardinals money line, 3-leg parlay. When that 3-leg hits, it brings a big smile to my face. And if you want that same feeling I get when I hit, just go to fanduel.com. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's fanduel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right. Let's get back into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast. If you like the show, please follow me on Twitter at CareerThomas24 for the personal account, Millard.Thomas123 on IG for the personal Insta, or look up Locked on Diamondbacks, both Twitter and Instagram for the show handle. But now let's discuss Fangraphs Power Rankings. These are the power rankings entering free agency, knowing it's taking into account how we would feel about these teams in 2025 with like basically each team's free agents like not on their roster. So like where we talk about the Dbacks and where they have the Dbacks ranked, it's like basically the Dbacks with their current roster minus Christian Walker, minus like Jock Peterson and Randall Grichuk. So it's like, how do you feel about each team as it currently stands minus their free agents? I believe is how it's being interpreted. And when you're looking at Fangraphs right now, they are very high on the D-backs entering this offseason, and they project them to be very good just right now with the free agents that they already are losing. The Fangraphs still believes the D-backs are still going to be a good team entering next season because they are actually currently 7th in Fangraphs Power Rankings entering free agency. Overall in Major League Baseball, it goes Braves, Dodgers, Phillies, Astros, Orioles, Yankees, D-backs. And so for the National League, D-backs are ranked 4th in the NL. And so Fangraphs is super high on the D-backs, project them at 85 and 77. That might not sound too good, but you also have to remember when you look at these kind of projections, they are always super conservative. Only 2 teams projected above 87 wins next year. Dodgers at 90, Braves at 93. And so the D-backs at 85 wins projected like a second wild card spot, a perfect place for the D-backs. And right now, I think that shows you. I think the fact that Fangraphs has the D-backs so high, Fangraphs a super respected website when it comes to the advanced analytics, when it comes to diving deep into the stats. This is a website you can trust their numbers when it comes to projections and things like that. I really respect Fangraphs. And so if they are having the D-backs currently in 7th minus the free agents that they have, this is like taking into account like Christian Walker potentially leaving and also guys like Jock Peterson potentially leaving. Like if you still think the D-backs are the 4th best team in the National League, that tells you how much talent this D-backs team already has on paper and why they still have a good chance to compete, even if they don't really make that many moves in free agency. But guess what? They are going to make moves in free agency because Mike Hazen has talked about how the payroll is going to stay basically where it was this past year because this D-backs team got so much extra revenue after being good in 2023. Guess what? People showed up to the ballpark in 2024 because I know in 2023 and every year prior, I could sit anywhere for like $5. This past year, if you wanted $5 seats, you were going to be that last row in the nosebleeds because games were packed this season, and it was great to see showing up to Chase Field Friday night and the ballpark was buzzing. Show up on a weeknight, like a Wednesday, Thursday, Monday, Tuesday, depending on the team. I think I showed up on a weeknight. I forgot. It was probably maybe the New York Yankees. I'd have to go back and look at the schedule for the D-backs this year, but there was definitely a few weeknights this past year where it's like, oh my God, yeah, the Yankees, they came in Monday through Wednesday. I'm pretty sure I went to 1 or 2 of those games. I remember the ballpark being insanely packed. Obviously, it's the New York Yankees, big market, but that's how it was for so many teams. Monday, Tuesday night, you go to Chase Field, and it's like, whoa, we are kind of rocking tonight, and it was cool to see. And so this D-backs payroll is probably going to stay the same according to Mike Hazen, and this D-backs team already on paper has a good amount of talent entering this free agency. And if they're able to supplement some of those free agents that could potentially leave this offseason, like Jock and Grichuk and Christian Walker, like if you could bring back one, if not all of them, like that would be amazing. But the D-backs are going to spend money to potentially replace those guys. And even without those guys currently on the roster, this D-backs team still has a ton of talent. You still have Moreno at catcher, who you feel good about, who you think can have, if he stays healthy, maybe a breakout season, because it seemed like at one point he was on pace for a pretty monster season this year. Marte, you don't expect to really go anywhere. Perdomo seems to keep ascending. Gurriel, you expect to be around the same. Eugenio, maybe he slips a little bit, but maybe is also more consistent from the start to the end of the season. Maybe McCarthy, you see more of the second half McCarthy for a full season. Corbin Carroll gets back to where he was. Like, there's still so much upside in this lineup. You look at the rotation, like that's really where you expect, hopefully, the D-backs to bounce back. Gal and Kelly just stay healthy. You probably don't feel worried. Fought year 3 in this D-backs rotation. New pitching coach. We'll see how that does. Just need one of Erod or Monty. Assuming we don't trade Monty, he probably will get traded. But if we don't trade him, just need one of those two guys to be good. Still got Ryan Nelson. Like, this rotation has so much bounce back upside potential with the bullpen now, a full season of Puck and Martinez, and hopefully we can add another high leverage reliever. But again, just with this team currently constructed, like, uh, maybe the offense obviously wouldn't be as good if you don't have Walker, Jock Peterson, Randall Grichuk, right? Even guys like Josh Bell. I just saw Kevin Newman just signed with the Angels. Like, yeah, maybe don't lead the league in runs scored minus those guys next year, but you're still like a top 5 offense. Like, that's still top 6 offense. Like, that's still good enough, because I believe the pitching should have a massive bounce back. I don't think the rotation should be as bad as it was last year. So you're going from maybe the best offense to like the 5th or 6th best offense, but you could also be going from like the 14th worst rotation in the National League to like maybe the 6th best rotation in the National League. So I think overall, some of those numbers can help even out, and maybe it could help out your record. Maybe you somehow squeak out to 90 wins, 91 wins. Maybe your offense is as good, but the pitching overall steps up. So your overall team balance is better entering next season. I believe that's why Fangraphs believes in this D-backs team so much, because they can see the bounce back. Yes, the lineup as currently constructed might not be as strong with the free agents leaving, but the rotation is still as deep as any team in the sport. The bullpen has some upside. Maybe it's not the best bullpen in the National League, but definitely has upside to at least be slightly above average, if not at least average, right? And so I think the D-backs being right here, 4th best team in the National League, shows you the upside of this franchise, shows you where that this 2024 season was pretty disappointing, and shows you that this team is super talented and should be a major bounce back team in 2025. I still love this roster. I still love this team. I think they're still loaded in the rotation, in the lineup. We definitely need to bring back some free agents, but if this team somehow misses the postseason again in 2025, like at that point, I think we know which heads are going to need a roll next year. Now I want to discuss Joe Mantiply and the 2024 season he just had with Arizona in segment number 3. But hey, if you're looking to buy tickets to an upcoming Phoenix Suns or Arizona Cardinals game, then the best place to do that, of course, is going to be Game Time, because Game Time is the best place for last minute deals on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. They have this feature called All In Pricing. When you toggle this feature on, it shows you the total cost upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. Get a panoramic view from your seat before you even buy. They also have the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right. Let's get back to the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, and let's discuss Joe Mantiply and the 2024 season he just had with Arizona, because I think we might underrate the season he just had with Arizona. You look on the forefront of like the 3.92 ERA, maybe it doesn't scream elite season, but by Joe Mantiply standards, I think this season was a lot closer to his 2022 All-Star year campaign than what he did in 2023, where he looked more like immortal. I thought this ended up being a very, very good season by Joe Mantiply. And yes, there were still some weaknesses and struggles in his game, but overall, I thought this was as close as you could get to like the best version of Joe Mantiply. But I think what we need to see more from him overall. It just maybe like a baseline level of consistency, because I still think there's like a roller coaster ride with Joe Mantiply where it's like 1 month he might be one of the best D-backs relievers, and then another month he just feels really untrustworthy. So if there's a way to balance out those highs and lows a little bit, I think it would just make him so much more effective, because after 2023, we were like, Joe Mantiply, only lefty specialist, like can only face left-handed batters, no ifs, ands, or buts. And then after 2024, it's like, you know what? People were having discussions about should Joe Mantiply be in the closing conversation, because his splits against both the platoon situations were actually pretty even and not too bad. Against the lefties, definitely superior. 206 average, 552 OPS allowed against the lefties, but against righties, not too bad for Joe Mantiply, a guy who has always been considered just a specialist. Just make sure he goes out there and just pitches against the left-handed batters. He's proving he doesn't need to do just that. 252 average and a 691 OPS allowed against righties. And he did face actually more righties than he did lefties this year, 20 more at bats against righties. And so a pretty large sample size where he did hold his own against righty batters. So that lets you know Joe Mantiply is a guy that's still improving and working on his game, and you don't have to pigeonhole him as just a lefty specialist. Now, what I will pigeonhole him as is a non-closer, because I think the numbers bear out. I think we've seen enough. Joe Mantiply is a good reliever, and I do like him, but he cannot be a team's closer. I think we've seen enough of that, because you do look at Joe Mantiply in save situations this past year, 13.2 innings pitched, a 5.93 ERA in those situations. He's just not built to be the closer, and it makes sense. Joe Mantiply is a sinker ball pitcher who tops out at like 80 miles at like 90 miles per hour. Like, this is not a guy who should be a closer. This is a guy who comes in and gets you a ground ball in a double play situation. Like, that's what Joe Mantiply is. He is not a closer. If you think Joe Mantiply is a closer, you are crazy. I like him, but he should not be a closer, because the numbers tell you he is bad in save situations. But non-save situations, that is where he thrives. Okay. 3.25 ERA, 44 innings pitch in non-save situations. Like, he's a good reliever, guys. Let's make sure we keep him as a reliever, because you try to make him a closer, and I just don't think that would work out. Put him in more of those mid-low leverage situations. He's like all right in high leverage situations. He wasn't that bad at it. 267 average, 704 OPS in high leverage situations, but just way better in non-high leverage situations, when the situation was not as stressful, not as pressurized. Joe Mantiply was, of course, better. Now, he was still solid. Clutch situations, you look at his numbers, runners, scoring position, like all that jazz. Like, Joe Mantiply was actually one of the better relievers on this D-backs team in those kind of situations. So there's still a lot left, I think, in the tank for Joe Mantiply, despite being a guy who feels older, 33 years of age. I think he's still fresh. I still think he has a lot in the tank. But like we say with Ryan Thompson, it's all about managing expectations and what his role is. For Joe Mantiply, if he's the D-backs 6th, 7th most important reliever, like, that's perfect. If he is like your second or third lefty, yeah, like, that's perfect. If you're bringing in Joe Mantiply to get the big double play in the 6th or 7th inning, like, that's perfect. That's how Joe Mantiply should be used, because Ryan Thompson, we talk about him as that ground ball specialist, right? Like 80% ground ball rate in 2023. It was like 60% in 2024. Joe Mantiply, another guy, pretty high ground ball rate. Maybe I'm not at the same level as a Ryan Thompson, but still 51% ground ball rate this past year. It's been 51% for his career. This is a sinker ball pitcher. And so Joe Mantiply, yes, he's going to pitch to contact, and sometimes that's going to get him in trouble, because that's just the nature of being a sinker ball pitcher. You miss with your location, you're already topping out at 89 miles per hour. Sometimes those pitches are going to get crushed. But actually look at the numbers for Joe Mantiply. You look at like hard contact stats allowed. not too bad for Joe Mantiply. He's actually pretty solid in those situations, and he's actually pretty nasty at getting people to chase his pitches. 100th percentile in chase rate this past year. And so he's actually he does a great job of making people chase his pitches, getting those ground balls. Like, Joe Mantiply is actually a very, very sound pitcher overall. Very good reliever. Should he be a closer? No, but if he's like your sixth best reliever, seventh most important reliever in your bullpen's probably pretty good. And that's where I want the D-backs to be entering 2025 for Joe Mantiply. Continue to be that lefty specialist. I'm okay if you need a little bit more rote to be a guy that could also pitch against righties, but I'm fine if you're just a lefty specialist, second or third lefty out the bullpen, only going against lefty relievers, because for Joe Mantiply, I want him at his best, and he is at his best when he goes against left-handed bats. I want him as a guy who's pitching like every second, third day, just coming in, get that double play ball, take out that lefty, and be that ultimate specialist for us, because I'm hoping the D-backs are able to add one or two really good relievers and hopefully push down some of these guys who've had bigger roles in the past, but I think have had too much on their shoulders. Joe Mantiply, I mean, at times, I think we all remember the year he was an all-star. He was the best D-backs reliever and like the only good D-backs reliever. So if we could get to a point where in a 2-year period, we go from Joe Mantiply being like arguably the best D-backs reliever to being one of the, 2 or 3 least important D-backs relievers, and like that's a positive sign because that's how deep the bullpen is, I would be very happy with that situation. So Joe Mantiply, keep doing what you're doing, and I'm excited to see what you can do in 2025. That's it for this edition of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Come back tomorrow for more Diamondbacks news coverage and insight. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy, dose it.